Hello and welcome back to Film on High Reviews. Today we're going to be discussing the 1966 historical epic Andrei Rublev. Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, starring Anatoly Solzhenitsyn, Ivan Lapikov, Nikolai Grinko, and Irma Rausch. The film tells the story of Andrei Rublev, a real-life Russian icon painter who existed during the medieval period, and gives us a loose sort of interpretation of his life and his struggles during a particularly turbulent era of Russia's history involving invasions and struggles among the higher castes, and Andrei's, essentially his struggle with both of his faith and his creativity. So what did you think of Andrei Rublev?
Well, you weren't kidding about this being a historical epic, as this is all in black and white. And it's a 3-hour film, so it's a very much like keep attention type of thing like that. But you can kind of tell what the broader story is what I really appreciate from this film, is that it's really just about, as you said, a man that comes into question with his faith and his beliefs and pays a penance that, for years, I don't know how you would be able to do it, but that's the thing. It's, it takes a certain type of character to be able to do that. And for him, at the end of the film, you get a sense of completion almost for this character, or for this person, seeing the kind of the faith being restored, but
the completion of the journey.
Yeah, but in almost a curious way.
Unexpected way, you could say. Yeah, Andrei Rublev is a film about many things. It's a film about art, it's a film about faith, it's a film about history and war, and a film about redemption. And it's interesting, this film's kind of place in Tarkovsky's filmography. I think this was the first film that really started getting him attention. He made some student films, and he made another film before this called Ivan's Childhood, which was pretty well reviewed, but I think this was the movie that really put him on the map. And it was a controversial film. It was controversial within Russia itself, or the Soviet Union at the time. And Andrei Tarkovsky ran afoul with the censors, who didn't like the depictions of violence, and they didn't like some of the historical and religious ideas in the film. So it was a film that went sort of back and forth. There's even two versions of the film, a longer version that's referred to as The Passion According to Andrei, which was Tarkovsky's original cut. And there's the version that he did after, which is, I think, about 10 or 15 minutes shorter, which is just known as Andrei Rublev. And since that cut, the shortened cut, was actually Tarkovsky's preferred cut, he said that's the one he liked best. I figured that's the one we'd review. And yeah, I really love this film. Like, this is a film that is both a character study, but it's also kind of a broader story about religion and, as we said before, history. Like, it doesn't give us like a deep, comprehensive idea of the history of the time and the historical period, but we do get like a certain idea of it and the kind of things that were happening, the clashes of faith, the different ideals and stuff like that. And most of the film focuses on the three main characters, Andrei, Danila, and Kirill, who all three of them are monks, who they start off the film traveling from a monastery to go meet with a man named Theophanes the Greek, who is a very well-renowned icon painter, and serve under him. And through these three characters, we kind of get different sort of versions or visions of creativity, you could say. Andrei is the most talented. He's kind of the master painter of the three. Danila is kind of the older, more practical, almost mentorish figure. And Kirill is more spiteful and jealous and arrogant in some ways. He's someone who wants to be recognized for his talent, but he feels like his talent sort of pales next to Andrei's. But in many ways, he has kind of the wrong ideas. Like, the contrast between him and Andrei and their approach to things, you get the feeling that Kirill wants to be known mainly for himself, to appeal to his own ego, but Andrei feels that his art is in service to something greater, to some greater faith or ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he has like very kind of specific ideas about art and what he wants to do.
That's the thing that kind of catches me with this film, is the fact that when you see these three characters, you might see yourself in one of them, you know? Maybe you have a friend that has really good talent, but you kind of wonder, you know, you have all this talent, but you're not doing anything with it, you know? You're squandering your life away. But the thing is, as we get to see through Andrei's perspective, you kind of get why that talent is not being squandered, it's being preserved for a better moment, but you don't know what it is.
Yes,
and
that's a good way of putting it.
You know,
yes.
And most people, they will kind of chastise you, saying it's like you're wasting your life, blah, blah, blah. That's not the point. A lot of people can either be talented by birth or just work at it through their own methods, you know? And that's the thing that Kirill didn't really get. And even at the end, you kind of see that he still hasn't really learned what it is to be an artist to begin with. And when you juxtapose that with Andrei himself and you see what he's gone through, trauma has a really weird take on people, and it takes a while to actually break out of it.
In many ways, the film really focuses on Andrei's journey as a character, starting out as like this really talented master painter and having a really specific idea of what he wants to achieve with his art, and in a sense what he's trying to achieve with his own life. And early on in the film, when they finally find their master, Theophanes the Greek, this is where things begin to change, where Andrei is selected to be the one who's going to be his pupil, and this causes friction with both of his friends, Danila and Kirill, who feel slighted and feel jealous in a sense. Danila is able to process these feelings and ultimately get over them, whereas Kirill is not, and he kind of goes off in a more resentful direction. And then Andrei, we see him later on, he's Theophanes' pupil, but he's also like a master of his own right, so he has apprentices of his own. And now his methods are sort of clashing with Theophanes, because Theophanes is a more cynical, burned out sort of guy who's lost faith in humanity and people in general. He just wants to serve like God with his art, and he's just kind of done with humanity, and you get a sense of just he's seen too much in his years. And Andrei, being the kind of younger, more naive and more optimistic guy, he says, well, I don't know how you can paint with that kind of mentality. Like, you have to see the beauty and the goodness in the world. So Andrei only wants to paint things that are going to kind of be positive and inspire people. And that sort of brings him into conflict with his own station in life, particularly at a certain point where he's being pressured to paint a painting of the Last Judgment. And that, you know, it's a very kind of frightening, disturbing painting with demonic apparitions and things like that. And Andrei just can't do it because that's not the kind of thing he wants to paint. And then things get even more dire and severe as the kind of real world begins to intrude, and Andrei is confronted with increasingly violent outcomes and situations as the political strife begins to kind of intensify, and now people close to him are being victimized. Like, a bunch of his artisans who had been commissioned to work on a church are blinded in a pretty callous and vicious attack. And then later things get even more dark, where one of the villages where Andrei has gone to restore a church gets attacked by a combination of Tatars, who are basically the invading force at the time, who were fighting against the Russians, and a force of Russians themselves, which is basically the result of a feud between two kind of princes who are scheming to gain control. And this one prince is, you know, he's gone so far to like the side of evil that he's literally teaming up against his own people. And it's a pretty brutal and violent scene where we see this whole village being sacked. People are killed, women are, you know, violated, there's a lot of destruction, and controversially there's also scenes of animal cruelty, which was a whole issue with the film as well, which I don't even know if we should get into that because that's a pretty sensitive issue. But then Andrei is kind of forced to take a stand, and in order to defend someone, he has to take a life. And obviously, Andrei, as a monk and a man of God, a man who has sworn not to commit sin, this leads him into a very dark place. And as a result of all of these horrors he's experienced, he decides to stop painting and also stop speaking altogether. Essentially becoming, like, he still remains with, like, the church, within the faith, but he just kind of commits himself to manual labor, and, you know, he turns his back on his own potential, his own glory, in a sense. So we see that journey from, like, you know, the bright, optimistic artist to just the burned out, like, completely, like, he can't even, because again, like, Andrei's art was so tied into his own faith in God and, you know, the beauty he saw in the world, and now that's been challenged in such a way that he can't go back to looking at things the way they were before, you know?
You know, you could relate that to real life with, you know, anything. If you have a talent that, and, you know, you've been working on it, but something happened, shit happens, and this movie will actually kind of help you out with that, because there's this kid that we need to talk about.
Yes.
The bell maker.
Yeah, like, one thing we should say about this film, like, the movie is kind of split up into vignettes, like episodes. We kind of get, like, I think 8 parts in all that are all separated with, like, title cards showing the year.
Yeah.
And yeah, we get the very final part, which focuses on, like, it's a bit weird because for most of the movie we're following Andrei and the people around him, but the final part of the movie focuses on this young boy who's been commissioned to build a bell by the Duke. And the reason that he's been commissioned is because his father was the bell maker, but his father died of plague, and he claims to be the only one who knows the secret to casting the bell.
So then from there you see an arduous, all these men, all these people working on this one bell. You get to see the type of labor that she had to do back in those days. And the whole thing stinges on, can you make a bell that rings? Because if it doesn't, all these people will perish.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's kind of this whole threat of death hanging over not only the boy who's taken control of this project, but also all of the workers who will be executed if this bell doesn't sound. And the boy basically says, like, he basically admits that he doesn't really know what he's doing. Like, we find out later that his father didn't actually tell him the secret to casting the bell, so in a sense he's working blind. And the film devotes a lot to this particular episode, but it's very significant because Andrei is present. Like, even though Andrei sort of moves to the background here, he's present the whole time and he's observing this process. And yeah, you can tell that he starts to get more and more absorbed in this process that the boy's going through, particularly as the boy begins to sort of turn towards his own faith in a way to complete the project. Like, we see him praying to God and stuff like that. Like, because when the boy starts off making this bell, he's sort of cocky and arrogant, but then as it starts to come together, he becomes increasingly sort of awestruck and really, I think, almost like crushed by the immensity of it all.
Yeah, and that's just to watch this kid. He's basically the underdog, you know?
Yeah.
He's that kid where you want him to succeed, even through all these types of, you know, challenges and obstacles. And even the men that work for him, they're like, you know, all right, boss, like,
pretty much, like, yeah, he's ordering him around, yeah.
You know, so as he's building the bell, as you mentioned with Andrei, he's seeing this whole thing, and it's almost kind of like a reflection of, you know, this used to be me before all this shit happened. You know? Yeah,
the boy is almost like a reflection of Andrei in that younger stage of his life where he was young and optimistic and idealistic and ready to kind of take on the world and compared to the burned out shell. And this whole experience ultimately becomes the catalyst for Andrei's spiritual and artistic rejuvenation, and in many ways sort of his redemption. And yeah, the redemptive aspect of the film really comes to the fore here, not only for Andrei but also for Kirill, who has made his way back to the monastery and repents his former ways. He now wants to be accepted. He wants to make up for it. The monastery agrees to accept him in return for a penance. He has to, I think, copy the Holy Scriptures 15 times, which it's unlikely he's even going to be able to do because he's an old man and it's too much work for him. But, you know, he's willing to take it on just because he's accepted the error of his ways. And he confesses his envy to Andrei. and tells him that when he first heard that Andrei had stopped painting, he was actually happy about it because it gave him like a sense of validation. But then he became more saddened and more horrified, and he realized that Andrei was essentially committing a grave sin by no longer using his talent that had been given to him by God to sort of honor. And even characters like Kirill, who, like I mentioned, is sort of an arrogant and envious sort of character, you still get a sense of him as a human being, and it feels like real. You know, he's not just some caricatured asshole, you know, who's set up to kind of get a comeuppance like you would see in a lot of American films or like modern day films. His journey that he goes through is just as important as Andrei's and as any characters in the film, you know?
Yeah.
And that, yeah, sparks the whole rejuvenation in a way. And there's an absolutely beautiful, wonderful scene where after this bell has finally been cast and rung, we see the boy, Borishka, weeping in the mud, completely inconsolable. And Andrei comes to console him, takes him in his arms and holds him. And that's when the boy confesses that his father didn't tell him the secret, you know, and he was essentially just working blind. And Andrei, for the first time in many years, speaks. He finally breaks his vow of silence, and he consoles the boy and tells him, you know, it's okay, you made a good bell, you know, you made people happy. And, you know, we'll both do what we need to do, essentially. You'll cast the bells, I'll paint the icons. Like, he's finally come around to accepting his own place in life. And it's a beautiful sort of sentiment. And, you know, when he says, you know, you made the bell, it made people happy, it's like the triumph of faith. Even though you were working blind, even though you didn't necessarily know what you were doing, you still succeeded.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of cool about it is that, okay, I'm not going to get too much into religion, but the fact that this kid didn't really have too much notion about, you know, religion, Christianity, all that type of stuff, you know? He was very much kind of like gumption.
Yeah, he's like a laborer. Yeah.
You know, he had that survival mentality, whilst Andrei was like, you know, he chose that faith, you know, he chose the monk faith and to live with it. But
or he was born into it, we don't know.
Yeah. But essentially, when you see this kid trying to do his best, I think, I don't want to say this is more of like the point of the movie, but the fact that Andrei recognizes this guy's talent, it's kind of like two beings kind of meeting for the first time, even though it took so long to kind of like be, you know, co-joined together and then just kind of keep creating talent. Because at the end of the movie, we get to see this beautiful tapestry of Andrei Rublev's paintings.
Yeah, the real Andrei Rublev's paintings and icons, which still remain to this day in many Russian Orthodox churches. And this is like the one moment of the film where Tarkovsky introduces color, and we're shown all of these paintings in full color, their full kind of glory. And it works as like a real kind of summation of the whole film. And like, this is a film that does play fast and loose with history. Like, you know, there was a real Andrei Rublev, there was a real Danila, like a lot of these characters did exist, Theophanes existed, but obviously I don't think that Tarkovsky was necessarily concerned with making a very accurate, like to the letter, historical or biographical film here. He was more using Rublev's life to make certain allegorical points about faith and about creativity and what it is to be an artist. And again, like, I feel like this is a film, because again, like the whole religious angle, I'm not like a super Christian. I was raised in Christianity. I know the basics of it. You know the basics of it. We understand the faith. So we can appreciate the film on that basic level. But on an artistic level, I would say, like, this is a film I would recommend to pretty much all artists. Like, if you're an artist, if you're someone, whatever you do, you're a musician, a writer, a painter, a sculptor, this would definitely be the kind of film you would want to watch, because I think it would speak to those people most profoundly. And the whole film is amazingly compelling, but the final segment in particular with the bell, I find really fascinating, because it seems to reflect in many ways Tarkovsky's own life and the process of making a film and the process of bringing a project together. And another thing we should mention is the opening of the film, the prologue, which is seemingly unconnected to anything else that happens in the film. It's a short scene of a group of people who are putting together a hot weather balloon, and as they're about to take off in it, they get attacked by a mob who start like beating them up and stuff, and the one guy manages to take off in the balloon, and he flies into the air, and he's laughing and having a great time, and then abruptly he crashes down to Earth.
Kind of like Icarus.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a strange scene. Like I said, it's not connected necessarily to the narrative of the rest of the film, but it sets the stage and sets the tone of the film very well, and the idea of creative people kind of being brought back down to earth and being suppressed by kind of the ignorant. Like, this is something, like, it's a very kind of, like, almost like fable take on it. Like, it's an interesting way to open the film and summarize these kind of themes, but we see it play out, like, in the sense of Andrei, like, his worldview being shaken just by these brutes and these violent people around him. Like, he's a guy who just wants to paint, and he wants to create these beautiful works of art, but he's surrounded by these savages who mutilate and kill and do these horrible things, and it leads him to a profound crisis of the soul.
Yeah, his soul got tainted and scarred, essentially. I don't know. If you're an artist out there, leave a comment down below to say, if you've gone through a crisis of your own faith or your own, willpower, to say with your art that it took so long that maybe you're still going through it, or maybe you've gone through it and maybe you have a word for other people, because it sucks to kind of lose your spark. It takes a long time for it to come back, and sometimes it comes out of nowhere, like this kid for Andrei, Just a little spark can just kind of revitalize everything, and then you're back at it even better.
Yeah. On a technical level, the film is very brilliant as well. It's kind of very... I'm not sure what the word would be. It's very sort of minimalistic in the way it presents things. Like, it's not necessarily like as technologically advanced as some of his later films like Solaris or Stalker, and it's very sort of earthy, but I like it because it gives a sense of realism, like that sort of grungy Middle Ages feel. And it's not like overly, it is a pretty like violent and brutal film at times, but I just love like the atmosphere of the film, the vibe of it. It's very beautifully shot and very beautifully directed.
Yeah, you could honestly be there when they're shooting the scenes. It feels sometimes very cold, even though it's all black and white. You don't get to see the colors, but just by the characters and how they feel, and just the way, the positions that they take, especially when they do kind of like sweeping shots and stuff. You get to see the whole valleys and stuff.
Yeah. And even though it's long, like, I feel in some ways this is one of Tarkovsky's most concise films. Like, it's 3 hours long, this version, but I still felt like it moved pretty fast for me. Like, there's just something about the episodic nature of the film, and it does, like, it's just like a simple, more relatable story. Like, whereas some of Tarkovsky's later films, like Mirror, or like I said, Solaris or Stalker, they dealt with a bit more complex ideas in a more kind of abstract way. This film presents things more directly. It's kind of a more character portrait, and it's a very spiritual film, and very much like, I think, a film that will speak to artists and creative people, like I mentioned before, and probably a film that will speak to religious people as well, because it has that sense of epiphany and redemption. Like, there is like a feeling, a redemptive feeling in the film, and like the film represents, it reflects like a lot of Tarkovsky's own struggles in his own career, I think, of trying to get things done, of working against the system, of having setbacks and stuff like that. And I think that's one of the things that really makes it great and relatable. Like, there's a feeling of warmth and humanity to this film, despite the more kind of dark and brutal aspects of it, which, it's a film that left me feeling hopeful. I really loved it, and it was very inspiring. So I would give it a 5 out of 5. Masterpiece, probably in my top 10.
I give it a 4.5 out of 5. I really dug it. It is the type of movie that you would watch, and basically, honestly, this is the type of movie you just watch when you need to have your faith restored, whether, as you said, religiously or just artistically. Just watch it.
Yeah. And even if you're just like a cinephile, and you know, because I've heard like different opinions about this film. Some people really love it. I've heard some people say it's not their favorite Tarkovsky film. Some people are going to maybe prefer the other films that are more technological and more out there. They might think this movie's a bit more simplistic and a bit more dull, but I don't know. I just thought it was a wonderful film, and I love like human stories. Like I love those really kind of human, relatable stories that have characters you can really kind of connect and relate to. So I would definitely regard this film as a masterpiece.
This has been Film on High.
Peace.
Later.